Greetings gamers, welcome to a brand new series where I make a homebrew D&D campaign and bring you along for every step of the process. Just a quick aside folks to say that there are some audio issues in this video that will be hopefully fixed by next week. So just hang on in there and enjoy the video. Next week hopefully these audio problems will be sorted. Before we dive in and start creating worlds, writing adventures and statting monsters, we need to decide what kind of campaign that we want to run. Thinking about what kind of game you want to play and what you want to get out from your game is really going to help you figure some things out further down the line. With a lot of the tips in this video, it's going to be a good idea to speak to your players before making a final decision and including them on the decision making process. There's no point in making a vast and complex world filled with wonderful locations and unique characters if your players aren't interested in playing in it. The first thing that you want to do before you start creating your homebrew campaign is decide what genre you want to play in and what kind of tone you want from your campaign. The system that you play isn't really crucial here. It's more important that you set out your genre and tone as early as possible. After all, there's no point in creating a grim-dark fantasy setting if all of your players just want to play something light and easy. Speak to your players before you start designing your campaign and get a sense of what they would like to play. Maybe give them a few options for genre and tone and have them decide on what sort of game they'd like to play in. Tone is especially important to think about here because if the tone of your game is radically different to what your players are expecting, it can put them off really quickly. For example, you could have a fantasy game that has more of the whimsy of a Discworld series, or you could have something grimdark like Warhammer. And if your players come to your table expecting something whimsical and fun like the Discworld series and instead are immediately thrown into the grimdark of a Warhammer world, that's going to be really jarring and the chances are that it's really going to put them off the game. Both of those settings are fantasy settings, but their tone is wildly different. So it's really important to early on speak to your players and find out the kind of game that they want to play. As I said, feel free to present the options to your players, but only present options that you'd be happy running. If you don't want to play something light-hearted and whimsical and full of jokes and things that are funny, don't present that as an option to them, because if you as the Dungeon Master don't want to play the game, the campaign's not going to last. The next thing to talk about is size. Do you want to run a campaign that's set in a single city? Or do you want something that spans an entire planet or maybe even a galaxy? It's important to think about the size of your campaign because it's going to drastically alter several aspects of your game. For example, if you're playing a campaign set in a single city and its surrounding area, chances are your players are going to get to know a fairly large selection of NPCs really well. However, if you're playing a game set across an entire galaxy, most of the NPCs your players meet are going to be one-off NPCs that they're never going to meet again, and there's going to be fewer NPCs that make a recurring, lasting impact on them. This means in that kind of game, if you want your NPCs to be memorable, you've really got to dial it up to 11 and give them traits and characteristics that make them instantly recognisable and rememberable. Another thing to take into account when it comes to size is how your players are going to travel around your game world. In a city, it is fairly easy to get from one side to the other within the space of maybe a few hours. But if your players are playing in a campaign that spans an entire world or even an entire galaxy, it could take days, weeks or even months to get between places. Now this is something you're either going to have to incorporate into your game and have that travel time be part of the game and part of the adventure for your players, or it's something you're going to have to work around with some kind of fast travel system. And then similar to size, you also want to think about the scope of your campaign. Do you want a campaign that takes place over the span of a few months, where things happen very rapidly and a lot of events are crammed into a really small space of time? Or do you want a campaign that spans decades and checks in with the characters at different points in their lives as their story progresses? Once you know the tone, the setting, the size and the scope of your campaign, it's time to think, how do you want to start planning? You've got two major options here, which I call narrow and wide. Starting narrow would be making a single town. You don't worry about the wider world, you don't worry about who's in power, what's happening in other countries. You focus on a single location and the people and events in that location. If you're a brand new DM, or you've got a brand new group of players, or if you're short on time, starting narrow is a really great way to go because it focuses your creativity into a small area rather than you spending time creating things half a world away that your players might never even reach. If you're interested in this kind of campaign beginning, I have an entire video where I made a starting town and put it out as a free PDF, which you can see up here. The other option is to start wide, and that means creating most of the entire world before your players ever step foot into it. This method is certainly a lot more work, but it has the benefit of placing your players into a world that really does feel real and lived in because so much of it is developed. You know who the gods are, you know who is in power 3 towns over, and you know a lot of the little details that they might be likely to ask, and there's a certain amount of history to your world that your players can draw on when creating their characters or when talking to NPCs out in the world. This method is also great if you just enjoy the process of world building. If you spend time thinking about fantasy worlds and different realms and realities anyway, this can be almost like a second hobby in itself. You can further the world of your D&D campaign, but you can also really enjoy doing it almost like a separate entity. If you start wide, just make sure to leave some mystery to the world. Don't write out every single little thing, and make sure to leave some things unwritten so that there's things the players can discover and influence and help you create as you go on, so that it doesn't just feel like they are pawns playing in your sandbox. You want them to feel like it's a real world without them feeling like they can't do anything to impact it. And there's one more major thing that I think it's worth thinking about before you start the process of designing your homebrew campaign, and that's where you ideally want it to end. Thinking about where you want your campaign to end before you started writing really helps keep that in mind as you go forward, so that you can use it as a constant reference point. If you know where you would like the story to end, it's easier for you to write events that help foreshadow it or inform the players about what might be coming. If you know, for example, that your players are going to be facing Tiamat at the end of the campaign, you can start laying the groundwork for that really early on, so that when the players reach the end of the campaign and they're facing Tiamat, everything seems cohesive and planned instead of just being a mishmash of stories that have been thrown together. I find it helps to think about your campaign as a television show. Each adventure is akin to an episode where it tells a small and isolated story, but then you also have your larger narratives that span multiple episodes and result in a character defining moment or a particular event that changes the status quo for your players. And then finally, across multiple seasons, you might have the big bad at the end of it all that results in your finale. And as you get there, you realise that there have been hints of it ever since episode or adventure number 1. You don't need to know how you're going to get to this finale, this ending of your campaign, but having an idea of where you want to get to really helps you sow some seeds earlier on and inform the choices that certain NPCs and other characters might make. By now you know what system you're going to be playing, what genre of game you're going to be playing, what the tone, size and scope of your game is going to be, and how you ideally want it to end. The next step is the creating itself, and that's what we're going to be starting with next week. Over the course of the coming weeks, I'm going to be creating a fantasy homebrew D&D campaign setting, and I'll be showing you every single step of my process along the way. So if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all the latest videos on this homebrew campaign series, and be sure to let me know in the comments what aspects of homebrew campaign making you'd like me to focus on so that you can get some tips and some inspiration from them. But until next time, happy gaming! Thanks for watching. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below for new content every single Friday. And if you want to keep watching, well, there's another couple videos for you to watch just over there. Happy gaming!